Good afternoon and welcome back to the Teacher Educator Conference 2015 in Hyderabad, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Rod Bolitho. Rod, thank you for coming along. I know you're busy, so it's good for you to take time out and come and talk to us. Yesterday you gave the opening keynote talk, which really kind of, I think, set the tone for, or has set the tone for the whole conference, and a lot of the things that you talked about, I think, of the threads have run through a lot of the talks that we've seen. I just wanted to ask you a few questions about your talk. In it you looked at, one of the things I was interested in was the 21st century teacher idea, and you looked at the challenges faced by teacher education in the second decade of the 21st century. I wonder if you could kind of briefly summarise some of those challenges in relation to the 21st century learner, and maybe talk about how these differ from the challenges in the past.
Yeah, I mean, if you work backwards, as it were, from the learner all the way to the teacher educator, you realise that learners these days are digitally natives. They've been brought up in an age when pushing buttons and having smart devices of one sort or another are almost part and parcel of the norm. And this gives them access to a great deal of language beyond what's going on in the classroom. So that's one aspect of the 21st century learner that I think teachers need to take account of, and that by proxy is something that needs to be taken account of in teacher education. But the 21st century learner also has more globalized horizons, is looking in many cases beyond the confines of his or her own town or city, looking at the possibilities of more travel, more varied ways of earning money and having a career and so on. And once again, that has an impact on a teacher who needs to teach English not only for the purposes of a school subject, but English for international communication. Mm-hmm. And if you take that back then to teacher education, it really means that the old paradigms of teacher education, which are rooted in philological traditions, need to change in order to make teachers much more ready to cope with the challenges that learners are presenting them with. Mm-hmm. Because I think now learners are beginning to challenge teachers far more, and make demands on teachers. And if you take that into the adult sector and into the fields of ESP and DAP and so on, learners in those fields want English for all sorts of international and global reasons, like taking part in international exchanges in their areas, like, for example, being able to present a conference paper, being able to read the literature in English, which is important to them, and so on. And so the scope of what a language teacher might be expected to cope with in these different fields is extending all the time. Yeah. So it has a big impact on teachers and in turn on trainers.
Okay, it's interesting. I mean, the point you made there about learners being much more globally aware, and the information that they can access is clearly informing them and allowing them to be kind of far more critical of the instruction that they're receiving and the training that they're receiving.
And the teacher and the textbook are no longer the sole sources of language for them. Yeah. They can access so much else now.
That's true, isn't it? I guess as well, another thing is, there's a big kind of move towards content creation on the part of the learner, so them kind of taking that responsibility. So it's something that the teacher also needs to, and the teacher educators need to kind of bear in mind, I guess, is that students are creators of content as well as sort of receivers.
And one of the other things which is quite difficult, I think, for some teachers is that they're confronted now with learners, especially at the advanced end of the spectrum, who are reaching beyond the teacher's own level of English. So the teacher's role becomes much more facilitative and is less concerned with pure input.
Okay, one of the recurring themes that I've kind of noticed in a lot of the talks has been the need to encourage practising teachers to take responsibility for their own professional development. And I wondered what your opinion was on how realistic that is, and what strategies we can employ really to help that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly, in some senses, it's a socio-political point. It's about where the power resides in the field of CPD. Because some institutions require teachers to give evidence of their own professional development on an annual basis through an appraisal system or through annual review. And teachers have to show that they've done something to further their own professional development. They've attended a course, they've updated themselves in a particular area, they've done some peer observation, they've done they may have published an article, given a conference paper. There are lots of different avenues. They may have done a piece of classroom action research, and all of this might be checked by an appraisal system within an institution. However, and it's a big however, hardly any of those things are absolutely dependent on an institutional directive. All of them are things which a teacher can undertake independently if they know a little bit about what the possibilities are. So the challenge, I think, in institution-based CPD is for somebody to be, if you like, a CPD champion within the institution, who is capable of laying out a menu of choices for teachers to attract them to the notion of CPD, and to demonstrate that it's not just about going on courses, that there are lots of avenues for professional development that a teacher could pursue, like the ones I've just mentioned, and that this could be done completely autonomously if teachers wanted to do it. And then the question of accountability to the institution arises only if the institution makes it a requirement. But if teachers are self-motivated, there are all those avenues which they can pursue.
Okay. I think Colin Bangor yesterday was talking about school leaders being those kind of CPD champions, perhaps, and that them kind of acting perhaps as...
I think CPD is a very good example of an area where leadership is needed, not management, leadership, where somebody needs to really make CPD a central quality issue within an institution, and to help teachers to lay the options out,
I mean, that's kind of, I guess, one example of, or one answer, or part of the answer to the next question I was going to ask you actually about, which is kind of your recommendations. And at the end of your talk yesterday, you made a number of recommendations. I just wondered if you could summarise those for us.
I want to start. To me, this is something I feel passionately about. An awful lot of quality assurance procedures are what I would call synthetic in nature. They are cumulative in nature. So quality assurance is often built up by a series of indicators, a series of criteria which are looked for by an external compliance-oriented agency, such as QAA in the UK or NAAC in India or whatever. And these agencies very often look at quality assurance on the basis of paper evidence, rather than at what's actually happening at the sharp end of education within an institution. So what happens is you get this atomization of QA, which quality assurance, which is based on single criteria which accumulate. And it's a little bit like observing a class as a teacher. What I would far rather do, and far rather see in quality assurance, is looking holistically at what an institution is achieving, what's going on within an institution, and then looking at the indicators as proof or as evidence of what's happening within that institution. So I think there's a big need for a holistic view of quality, which has to do with what's actually happening, the evidence of what's actually happening in classrooms and in training contexts. In the same way as if you go in and observe a class, if you go in with a checklist and you're looking to tick boxes, you may miss the big picture of what's happening in a class. And I think that applies in QA as an analogy here. You need to look at an institution-wide picture and then look at the parts, but don't just do one, do both, you know. So that's how I see a way in which improvements could be made in QA, in quality assurance.
Fantastic. Rod, thank you very much for taking the time to come and speak to us, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.